Hello, my name is O2. Welcome to the lower part of the studio for the 9th episode of the Ableton Live lessons. Since I've been working on pieces for 2 different projects, we had to take a break from our lessons for a while. In the meantime, I really appreciate your patience and understanding. I've also started getting asked frequently. The students are asking, when will the lessons continue? Finally, we're picking up where we left off. Today, I want to show you the warp function in Ableton. The main purpose of warp is the tempo we have determined in the track, the different samples and sounds we use, both in that tempo and in the original version of the track. It's a very important feature that helps us align and combine the tones. I've selected 4 different loops here. A kick loop, a bass loop, a pad loop, and a lead loop. These are at different tempos, and I've identified them to fit into the piece. At 123 BPM. Our click loop is 128, our bass loop is 115, our pad is 97. And again, our lead is at 128 BPM. Let's assume we're working at 123 BPM for the piece. We've imported some samples from outside into our project. Now let's try to match them to the tempo with warp, and then align their tones with each other. When we only play the kick loop and the lead, different tempos. Let's double click here so that the waveform appears when we apply warp. It will be aligned to the tempo now. If we create a loop from here, we had selected warp from here, now we choose loop from here. It will now be playing it. It will be playing endlessly. Good. Tempo is set. Now let's take a look at the bass loop. I'm adding it twice. I'm just going to take the bass. 115 BPM. It's aligned to our tempo again. Let's go ahead and apply warp in the same way. And let's create a loop again. It's been set. Here we have the grid systems that we call the grid. I'm here already. If we zoom in on the hit counts, we can see it in more detail, or you can completely change this grid system by right-clicking anywhere here. For example, show us as 1 over 16 or show us as 1 bar. Look, the grid changes immediately. Above, the bar beat grid doesn't change at all. This should stay at 16. It actually set it up, but due to the nature of the loop itself, there are slight delays. We can already see them visually here. If we want it to be set even more precisely, as soon as we hit warp, it immediately places a warp marker here. If you right-click on this, usually what you'll do is set 111 here. So, you can choose where you want it to start from. After that, you can do warp from here. You can change the warp sample to 4 bars or 8 bars. If we want to get a sufficiently accurate result, sometimes it depends on the algorithm we're using, and I'll be showing the warp algorithms. We might also need to make manual adjustments ourselves. In that kind of situation, when we double-click, it immediately creates a new warp marker. For example, if we pull it like this, this allows us to do much more manipulation, precisely, and gives us much more. A situation that offers different possibilities. We pay attention to selecting these points we call transients, which are the initial points where the sound enters. He had already sat down a moment ago. But since it has a slight groove of its own, there's a situation where it plays with a delay. I take that for example, because I don't want to use it that way. I'm just doing it manually. Like this. I decided to do this in a 2-bar format. Let's say I don't want to use the whole loop. What you see here, at the end of the measures, a trim marker appears right here. With trim this, I brought it up to here. So, as long as we're in the loop, it will always play these 2 bars. Let's play it again. Right now, of course, it's sitting more clearly. There will also be 6 warp algorithms: beat, tone, texture, repeat, complex, and complex pro. Normally, if it contains a beat like a percussive or drum instrument, I'm saying it purely, of course. If we are working on an audio file that contains something, the algorithm we use is beat. But if there is a melodic element and there is no rhythmic content in it, I'm 99% likely to be using Complex Pro. Complex Pro is especially useful when we make a tonal change on the existing sound, which I'll be demonstrating shortly in the pad and lead sections. There's a very strong and well-functioning algorithm there. This beat sounds really nice right now. Let's mute these guys for now. We'll hear these two together. The kick we warped and press. If we click on the scene, it plays everything in this channel and the scene. Everything is on the tempo. It's playing everything in the scene. Right now it looks like everything is sitting on the tempo. At this point, we actually don't have much use for the click anymore. As you can see, we now have the kick and bass. Now let's sync to our tempo, which is 123 BPM. Let's say we decided to change this. We set it to 116 BPM. For example, since we've performed this warp process, we can make any changes we want regarding the tempo of the track. That tempo. Constantly. These two are now synced. Now, I've selected a pad loop here, 110 BPM. It's something that has nothing to do with the tempo of our track. I'm listening to it first by playing the solo. As expected. It's at a different tempo. I warped it again. I played it again. Very nice. Nice. Let's also loop this. Let it say repeat continuously. From the moment you activate the loop here, this loop shows you how long the measure is. Sometimes the sound sources we use may not be exactly at whole numbers like 4 and its multiples. Pay attention to this. So we selected a loop and as you can see here, it's 3 bars. If a 3.2 shape has a certain distortion, it won't repeat every 4 beats again. Your tempo might not fit. It's also worth noting this always. It's important for it to be in multiples of 2, 4, and 4. Here, for example, is the bass we used in our track. The key is F minor. We want our piece to be in F minor, but our current pad loop is a minor. Under normal circumstances, to fit the tempo of our piece, we can change the tone from the pitch parameter. What we're doing is pulling it down by 2 semitones. We're pulling it down to A and 2 more semitones lower. Or is currently playing familiar. It will be here. The beat algorithm is not going to be efficient enough, especially in a sound society that contains purely melodic content. That's why the parameter we're using, as I mentioned, is the algorithm, or rather Complex Pro. Now let's listen with the bass. By the way, here. So, along this line, if you hold it and drag it up, It shows you not only the volumes of your channels, but also the peak points of each channel. This peak parameter is important, especially when mixing. No, that's not it. Look, it's not a peak. Just a little piece of information. So I've trimmed it a bit. Right now, as you can see, we've actually placed this pad loop into familiar. If we convert this back to a beat, it actually worked well again. The advantage of Complex Pro is that it creates two different parameters called formant and envelope. Our melodic content and what we do on it. As the manipulations on tone change become more diverse and begin to use more factors, getting the right tone and the right frequency becomes much more important, especially in terms of the integrity of the piece and the mix. So this formant and envelope parameters are things that are really useful for us. Let's visualize that within itself. Seems it's making minor changes. Turn up the volume a bit. Overall, this was the original tone. If you remember, it was that La minor. We took it down to something like -4. For example, it made a more radical move like -8. The beat algorithm is working quite well right now. As I mentioned, Complex Pro gives us a more precise pitch result. Gives us a pitch result. It seems we found it. They are in the same tempo and also in the same conditions. We made quite an extreme change, like from 97 BPM to about 3 BPM. But it's really nice. It's open. I've also chosen a lead for this. That's at 128 BPM and bone. Is it F minor again? Let's see if we can hear it solo like this if we play it. Of course, we'll be adjusting our tempo again. We immediately warped it from here again. Let's check the tone. Again. It's already F minor. Same. Super. Already. Right now we have 4 loops that are perfectly aligned both in tempo and tone. As I mentioned about the warp algorithms, if I'm dealing with a rhythmic pattern, I'm using the beat. If I'm working with a melodic content, I'm using Complex Pro. For example, the other 4 algorithms, to be honest, I hardly ever use those parameters. Another thing I want to show here is this. Section 2 and times 2. Functions. Tempo allows us to double the speed of what we're using, or slow it down by half. For example, let's do it like this. Right now it's going to be done on this lead that we're currently working on. Let's play it again. By the way, let's make a loop. This. It's currently playing at double the tempo, and since our algorithm is set to beat, there's quite a bit of distortion in the sound. Let's convert this back to Complex Pro. Much better. Or the opposite, let's slow it down to half speed, meaning let's divide the tempo by 2 and play it in half time. Let's weave the beat algorithm again as we explore the intricate details of its structure and understand its nuances. in solo. Of course, since the process we did again is an extreme move, the beat algorithm couldn't read it beautifully enough. Again, Complex Pro. As you can see, this gives a much more precise result. Generally, the default settings are fine, is sufficient. So, format 100 and this envelope should be 128. It's completely a matter of preference and how it sounds within the mix. I'm often playing around with this parameter. One thing we need to pay attention to regarding warp, so by pressing Command comma or Control comma, when we enter the settings section, we'll see a part called Record, Warp Launch right here under these tabs. Here I keep these off. Normally, when you import your project, it selects this as Warped 1, Shut, when the program is installed with default settings. I keep these off. Let's keep the default warp mode beat as standard. The reason I'm doing this is that I take it as unwarped, and I want to make the manipulations according to the tempo myself. First, the program with itself. I'm letting it do it by default. Then, to allow myself to make the necessary small adjustments if I want to. If these are because, this will also come as one. The fact that the tempo automatically handles the warp is a big deal for me. Since it's not a useful option, I keep these two options off. These will be open for you. You can change this according to your personal preference. You can turn it on and off. Already, let's just say here that it has its original tempo. It automatically places a warp marker here. When we click on this warp marker, let's say we have a very long piece, a full track, and we're going to do a remix of it, or it could be an a cappella vocal. Whichever transient we want to start from, if we're going to do the warp process from there, let's say we want it to start from here on this loop. I'm placing a warp marker here by double-clicking. Then, let's set this part 1, 1, 1, 1. So let's make this the entry point of the loop. Now it will play from here in every hand. And then it offers me different options here. Warp from here. From here, warp will always show the tempo of this track as whatever it is at 123 BPM. Warp it straight. Again, warp it at 123 BPM. There are different options like warp it as just an 8-bar loop. Yes, especially in melodic patterns. So, in things that don't contain any beat elements, the algorithm sometimes doesn't provide accurate enough results. That's why they've added 5 different extra warp modes here. In some cases, things can really get completely confusing. In such cases, here's how it goes. I place warp markers automatically by double-clicking them myself. Maybe because, Instead of doing a standard process, I will be applying different options. Let's say I want it to be like this. I'm going to change these now. There's a different pattern in my mind. I want this to come in this late. Tempo now. This one is delayed. I can already see this from the grid. It allows me to perform a manual operation like this. If it had normally stayed in the beat, after making such dramatic changes, the sound will be much more distorted. Let's take something complex. A much better result. Those 2 points over there are already off again. I can see it visually too. I've put these back in their places. I'm actually manipulating that reward in a pretty extreme way right now. I've decided to have a pattern like this. And as a result of the process I did with this 8-bar length, I want it to be 4 bars, let's say. I will select it from here like this, input 1. I had done this. I can manually write here 4, 0, and 0, so it will play exactly 4 bars. This way it will always be synced with the track. In the 9th lesson of our Ableton Live course, we tried to explore Ableton's warp functions. Thank you for attending the class. See you in the next lesson. Goodbye.